Hello, I'm Jared.
And I'm Ebony, and this is his
And hers, Warhammer 40K. Yay!
We're back.
We're back.
With Warhammer Crime.
We're with Warhammer Crime, that's
Yep.
right. This time we are talking about Grim Repast.
That's right, by Marc Collins.
A Quill-and-Drask novel.
Yeah.
It's interesting, each of the Warhammer Crime books have started to... They get like the name of the probator or investigator involved in it. As they kind of expect each one to become their own series.
Yeah.
None of them have sequels yet.
I think they will.
It's been 3 years since the first one came out, since Bloodlines came out.
I guess.
So I don't know about that.
I don't know. I hope that they have sequels. I really liked the Noctis and Lux one, and I really like this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think what's different about this from Flesh and Steel is the different part of Varangantua, and I think this... Go ahead, you can go.
So that is, you're going to say, like, the difference in the part of the city that's being portrayed?
Yeah, and also just the sort of film noir vibe. Like, I feel like Polaris, which is where we are, is cold and snowy and dark, and I could see it in black and white. It felt very film noir, which I remember feeling that way in Flesh and Steel, but it was a different part of the city with, like, a different, I guess, climate vibe. This vibe feels very film noir story. Like, I can imagine it being rainy and cold and wearing a trench coat and your hat. Like, it is perfect scenery. So I think I like Polaris better than I like where we were in Flesh and Steel.
Yeah, it feels almost like if you had set New York in, like, Antarctica.
Yeah.
Like, it's real cold there.
Yeah, it's
and
very cold and dark and grimy and, like, gritty, and I'm into it.
Or actually, for a more realistic example, probably like Oslo, like a Scandinavian city.
Yeah, I'm into it.
Yeah. Our main character, Quill-and-Drask, I would say, I don't know if I'd say he's more introspective than the others. You think so?
I think that this feels more like I guess all detective film noirs, the thing that you need is a really great main character that pulls you in. But I didn't feel like I was in Noctis's head as much as Quill-and-Drask, and I think that's because he's fundamentally broken, and I like that in a character, right? He is recovering from this previous case where his mentor became a crazy person and actually tortured him. So, like,
yes.
He's physically and mentally broken, and you get a lot of his thoughts, which I think sucks you in and keeps you invested in him as a character.
Yeah, there was an anthology when Warhammer Crime Force first started, where it was just one short story for each of the different authors or investigators. It was called No Good Men. And the complaint there is it felt like, oh, all of them are the same, brooding male investigator trying to figure something out.
Yeah.
And the three Warhammer Crime ones, Quill-and-Drask, Noctis, and you don't know Zidorov, but he's the probator from Bloodlines.
Okay.
All of them were featured there, and now having read the three books, Bloodlines, Flesh and Steel, and Grim Repast, I think there's some pretty clear distinctions between them.
Yeah.
Quill-and-Drask is definitely the most, like you said, the most broken of all of them.
Okay.
Where he's suffering from his mentor who had fallen, and he's trying to get out from under that shadow.
Yeah.
Noctis being kind of a rich boy who fell into...
He has the chip on his shoulder of, like, playing cop, kind of.
Right.
Yeah.
And Zidorov, who you will meet, is a family man.
Okay.
He has a wife, he has a daughter, who he's worried about, like, going off to war. She wants to join the Imperial Guard, and he's like, absolutely not. No one who joins the Guard ever comes back.
Yeah.
So that is his story.
Okay. Yeah, I think those are distinct enough. I do think that the whole universe suffers from your like kind of morally ambiguous dude who's kind of grimy, right? It is the pitfall of a film noir, although I think that is the genre and less...
Yeah, that I would say that is definitely the point.
Yeah. Okay.
So in Grim Repast, the crime that we're involved with is a set of murders to start with.
Basically a serial killer, which I like that way better.
Yeah.
And I get that there's a lot of, in this setting, it's a lot of, like, sort of industrial business. The giant businesses of the Imperium are bad for or potentially bad for Gargantua throughout all of the stories. But I appreciate that this one's like a legitimate serial killer, sort of.
Yeah, no, this one is the closest to what I would call a regular serial killer.
Yes.
Compared with the other Warhammer Crime stories that I've read. So the first body that we come across is this individual named Mercutio Ferentis. And what was interesting is the body looks very ragged.
Yeah.
Like the descriptions that they give of it are often that a wild animal has gotten to it.
Yeah, like pieces are missing. But when they get it back, I guess, to sort of do a thorough examination of the body, it seems like it's a little bit wild, but also a little bit controlled.
Yeah,
right?
there's a mix of these sharp cuts as well as surgical
removals of flesh
Yep.
and organs. And Mercutio Ferentis, the victim, is clutching a piece of cloth, but also when they start to take out organs, there are organs that have been wrapped in pieces of cloth.
I don't think that was his body.
No,
that was the other one's body.
I think the other one's all replaced with cloth. There's a lot of cloth.
There's a lot of cloth, and that is sort of like the end of Act 1, I would say, is the investigation into the cloth that they're finding both on Mercutio's body and
on another body
that was
they
brought
already
in.
had. So Quillen Drass asks the coroner and the Verispecs to look into other bodies that fit this description, because he has sort of a spidey sense that this is not a normal murder or robbery gone bad, which that's sort of his thing. There's this ongoing, he has a knack for uncovering the uncanny.
They call it a gift, and I do appreciate that.
It's a little bit psychery, maybe.
I would say what a lot of the Warhammer Crime books, and maybe Flesh and Steel did this the least, was restrict down the amount of like blatantly Warhammer 40k elements to it.
Yeah.
It's like they describe this gift, and part of you is like, does that mean he's a psyker? Well, it's absolutely not clear in the slightest.
Yeah.
And then the other books, there are minor elements that you will see here and there. There's one at the end that was mentioned that sort of sets the time period for it.
I agree. And I kind of like that.
I do too.
And so there is another body that they have that looks similar, has similar, like, there just is a similar MO in how it was killed, and there is more of this cloth. And so sort of the end of that act is Quillen going to figure out where this cloth came from, which I think is a really cool scene.
I agree.
Yeah.
There's essentially a fabrics district. In all of the Warhammer Crime, the development of Gargantua as a city is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And it's especially interesting for me because I'm a big fan of Necromunda, which is a totally different type of hive city.
Yeah.
So the contrast you can do, and there's one contrast in particular, I'll tell you about it near the end of this.
Yeah. And so he finds this place, and all of the sort of textile workers who work there making this fabric are blind because they work in this sort of cathedral-esque like building, but in the basement in the dark making this fabric. But they've all been doing it sort of within family lines for so long that they can do it by muscle memory, which I think it is cool and spooky, right? He's talking to this lady and she's blind and they're in a basement and everyone is sewing. It's cool. And it turns out that this place, which is called the House of Grace, makes fabrics that are used to wrap the bodies of noble dead. So there are all of these sort of agricultural business.
So in Gargantua, and every hive has some sort of noble houses for the most part. On Alecto, or I'm not sure if it's Alecto the whole planet or just Gargantua the city, we don't really know enough of a distinction between Gargantua and Alecta to sort of separate that. They're known as, I guess, the first families.
Yeah, who settled the planet.
Yeah.
Right? They're the first humans to
That
find
is sort of the key storyline and key background element of the world that gets introduced in
and sort
Grim
of the
Repast.
nobility. Yeah, and so they make this fabric that is used to wrap the bodies of noble deads for their funerary services, right? And so that starts to put Quillen on the trail of this must have something to do with the nobles. But while all of this is going on, clearly the serial killer behind the murders is watching this investigation, and they basically bomb this building while he's in it. They start a
Yep.
fire. And so then there's this really cool scene where he's trying to help these blind ladies escape the fire. And
he encounters an individual that
is dressed in a black body glove.
I think that's supposed to be...
I think it is the serial killer.
I think it is, yeah.
But he's wearing a black body glove and a really intricate black and gold animal mask. And like Quillen sees him through the smoke. It's really quick. He helps get these ladies out. He gets into a fight with this person. He gets knocked out. And then he wakes up in the back of an ambulance taking him somewhere. And they are taking him to meet his boss, I think, Constantin.
Constantin.
And she has a noble with her whose name is Famous
Natch. Famous
Natch, right?
Which sounds like...
terrible.
Sounds terrible.
Yeah, and so, Natch tells him that they're aware of this, but they think that it has to do with sort of corporate conspiracies. The other Combines who are against the Natch/Vranks Combine are trying to take them down and make them look bad, etc. And that he should kind of let this go and let them do their own internal investigations. And his boss is like, that's fine because the Combines pay the Bastions and fund them and are the reason why you have a job. So please let this go. Bye.
Yeah, there's very much a cover-up coming from the noble families to
Yes.
keep this away.
Yeah.
And the higher-ups of the Bastion are all in favor of keeping it that way.
Yeah.
Which is very unfortunate for Drask, who is probably the most straight man of any of the probitors from Warhammer Crime that I would say. Where he is dedicated to the Lex.
Yeah.
And the Lex is an interesting terminology as well, because we often see her with material related to the Adeptus Arbites, who are sort of the imperial level cops that are often referred to as such, or they're sort of like an FBI equivalent, is how they come across a lot.
Yeah.
They have the Lex Imperialis, which is the laws for governing of the Imperium.
Yeah.
However, what we get introduced to here is
the Lex Electo.
the Lex Electo,
Yeah.
which is the laws of the planet, which
Yeah.
is a term I have not seen before, and I think it's a nice bit of setting precedent for how to define other civilized or hive worlds.
Yeah, it's a good idea. And so they tell him to let this go, and obviously he doesn't let it go. And so he goes back home, and is this when his home is broken into?
No, before that, he goes to Vranks.
Oh, that's right.
So he now
That was a poor choice.
Now that he knows that this Natch fellow is involved and that he's a big shot at Vranks, which is sort of an agricultural import company. The Warhammer Crime series has really been the only place where we've gotten to see these sort of mid-tier, planet-level institutions that involve like the transportation of goods on or off of specific planets, but which like at an Imperium level, no one would have ever heard of this.
Yeah,
this
it's
place.
very cool though that you get to see that working on a planet level.
The Vranks headquarters in its descriptions reminds me of any modern big software campus.
Yeah.
It feels like a Google campus. It feels like an Amazon campus.
Yeah.
With the big gold statues, and then above everything else are the stone imperial statues that are twice the height of everyone, and it gives this great sense of you can have whatever local culture that looks democratic and free as you want, but just remember the Imperium is always, above that.
Yeah. So he shows up there, and Natch does see him, but he's kind of like, what are you doing here? Didn't we say this was not a thing? And he says ostensibly that he's impressed with Quillen's investigation, and he thinks he's doing a good job. And then he gets whisked away by his son, Torin Natch, who's kind of a douche.
It was at this point, this might be one of my few key complaints about the novel, is when Torin Natch shows up, it's so blatantly obvious that he is the serial killer.
Yeah.
Like, because he just sort of shows up just long enough where okay, I'm
supposed to think about this character.
You're supposed to think about this character.
But what is interesting in that scene is that Torin whisks away Themis, his dad, and Araceli Vranks, who is sort of the actual head of the Vranks Combine, pulls Drask into her office, and she starts telling him about sort of the first founding families and the first landings and what it was like in space, and those long journeys and how terrible it was, and how she's really invested in the history of this, and she really wants to give Drask whatever he needs to do this investigation.
Now, there was also, she made mention of a particular passage which showed up
Later.
it showed up earlier at one of the bodies.
I don't know. I don't remember that being a thing.
Remember they walked down an alleyway and found it scrawled in blood?
Oh, that's right. She told him to read this book, and he didn't read it, but she did quote a passage out of it.
Right.
And then he leaves her office, and that is when we get to our second body, right? Or our third body. There's a lot of bodies.
Are you talking the one that was strung up?
Yeah.
I think so. Honestly, I don't remember a lot about that particular one.
I remember that one, the scene of it being impactful, but that is where the thing is scrawled on the wall in the alleyway.
Okay,
yeah,
I think you're right.
That, yeah.
Did he go to the priest? Well, he went to the priest before or after that?
He goes to the priest at least twice in this book,
yeah.
because he also has this sort of internal character flaw about his father. His father wanted him to become a priest and serve the Imperium sort of religiously, and Quillen is clearly not super religious, but his father was, and he decided to become an officer of the law, which his father forgives him for, but you get the sense that his father was kind of abusive and kind of mean, and so they have this priest that they would go see all the time. His name is Waylon, and he goes to talk to Waylon for guidance at least once, and then later he goes back to talk to him again about what that passage is, and what he thinks that there is some sort of religious bent to these crimes. And he is relatively correct.
Yes.
So he leaves her office, and then I think that is when they find the next body strung up. And this one, it seems like the serial killer has really taken their time. They strung them up on a light post, and it is done in a way to draw Drask's eye and to show sort of the full extent of what this murder could be
right.
like.
And this is really the second section of the book where it is clear that the serial killer now knows that Drask is involved and is sort of playing with him with each body. He's following after Drask. He kills this body and displays it in such a way that Drask can see him. He eventually kills Wieland while Drask is there. Not
Drask
exactly.
Finds the
Drask
body,
finds the body,
but the most important thing about that body is that there's a scene where someone has been in Drask's apartment, which we didn't talk about, and his letter opener is missing.
Oh,
and
I missed that. Yeah.
He kills Waylon, decapitates him. It is gross and bloody and all the things you want from the serial killer story. But at the scene of the crime is Drask's letter opener, right? And also, Drask has been told multiple times to stop investigating this case, and he keeps doing it, and so he's kind of been fired at this point.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So
he has, in a very literal sense, had to hand in his gun and badge.
Yep. So he's not a probator anymore. He is a murder suspect. And so now he's 100% on his own. And this part I think is cool because we get to see a little bit more of the underbelly of Polaris, right? He is basically a cop, so he has informants and sort of crime bosses that he interacts with regularly. And he goes to a crime boss named Barnabas and asks him for help. And the first thing they do about that help, they agree that they need his help, and Barnabas puts men on the Natches, both the father and the son.
Well, so what was interesting when he met with Barnabas is I did not immediately get the sense the kind of criminal power that Barnabas had. I thought he was just sort of almost a one-off or
I think he's a crime boss.
No, he is.
Yeah.
And we definitely see that in the second scene that we see with him. But the first time I thought of him almost as a king of beggars type.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's we got people, whatever, but he's not he's more of one of Sherlock Holmes's little people who go around. No,
he's a full
he's
crime
a
boss.
serious, owning territory, having wars with other gangs crime boss.
Yeah. So they have put people on Famous Natch and his son Torin.
Yeah.
And now Quillen needs more help, and they have this back and forth you'll owe me, I'll owe you, and Quillen hates that because he is really a straight man and wants to follow the rules, but he doesn't have any alternative now. And so Quillen has an augmetic eye that when he was a cop he could use to take pictures of things and save those files, but Barnabas goes, that's also how the Bastion can follow you. So they electrocution murder his augmetic eye, which is terrible. But so now it's off and he can't use it, but it's also painful and weird. And now Barnabas has told him that having put this man on the Natchez, he's lost one of his
he's
sort of
lost one
junior
of his men.
dudes.
He wants Drask to bring his man back.
Yeah, and they think he's dead. They want him to return his body.
Yeah.
They've been following the father and also the son Torin, and he's been going to weird places. And so Barnabas has a lead on the last weird place they saw the son Torin Natch. And Drask is going to go there. And Barnabas does give him the option to take, like, criminal dudes with him, and he says no. So he goes there on his own, and that is when things go wildly awry.
So he comes to what is basically a commercial safe house, goes inside, sneaks in, and finds a full freezer of hanging bodies.
Yep.
And it's really pretty graphically
Yeah.
described. In fact, this whole book, I saw someone mention, with maybe a half an hour's work of editing, this could have been labeled as a Warhammer horror book.
Yeah, I would say
Like,
you need a little more scare, yeah.
Of all the Warhammer crime books, this is definitely the most... Well, the one scene in Flesh and Steel goes
Yeah.
places,
Yeah.
but on a personal level, I
Yeah.
think this is the most gruesome of the Warhammer crime books.
Having a penchant for the gruesome things, I would say that it isn't just like gratuitously gruesome. It is, all of the gore is in service
but I
to
think,
the story.
I think a part of it is also it affects Drask.
It does.
Like,
Yeah.
you can see the emotional impact of the bodies on him.
And it's you're in his head a lot, so it is impactful for
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
And I feel like that is a thing in like that helps Warhammer horror a lot. That a lot of the Warhammer horrors that we've read, with the I guess it shows up a
Yeah.
little bit, but I feel like it doesn't show up as much as it did in this book,
Yeah.
and it makes it scarier.
Okay, I could give you that. Yeah, it's not scary. I
Yeah.
wouldn't say that. Yeah, you could call it a horror book, but I think the element of the cases and it being focused on solving this mystery is what makes it crime.
This one feels more horror than any of the other crime books that we've read.
I would agree with that. The other crime books were very like, this is sort of a corporate espionage and someone happened to get killed. Yeah. And so he's in this larder of bodies, and a sort of servant dude stumbles upon him in this larder of bodies. And he's like, "What are you doing here?" And he's like, "Do you know what's in this room?" Like, he's very upset by the mutilated bodies. And the dude is weird and obviously a part
He's
of
a
some...
servant.
Yeah.
Like he's a normal servant of like a classic 40K style cult.
Yeah, he's very into it. And so Quillen ends up having to kill this dude, but he puts on his robes and follows him down a hallway, like goes down a hallway and comes across a guard, and the guard is like, "They're waiting for you. Like, the party started, and like, Lord Natch is angry because you're late."
And it's at this point that in my head I go, okay, this book is eyes wide shut.
Yeah.
Like, this is eyes wide shut.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, so then he gets into this room and he gets to walk around as a servant, and he sees all of these sort of famous, super rich nobles, and they're about to eat this big, sumptuous repast that Quillen just learned is made out of people.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it is a thing that all of the first families do. It is a tradition that has been going on for, it might be pre-Great Crusade, but I don't fully buy that.
We don't have a real grasp of
We don't have a
time.
real grasp of time. It's at least 6,000 or 7,000 years old.
Yeah, it's been going on for a long time. Natch Senior is currently the head of it, right?
Yeah.
He's hosting this feast, and it is also very eyes wide shut, because then they say, like, people go off to their rooms after the eating and do things.
It's rich people doing crazy stuff in secret.
Yeah.
Like, that is the core of
Inclusive
this.
of eating people.
Right.
And so
They are very, like, fancy about it.
they are, yeah. The meal looks great.
With the exception of the hunt.
Yeah, we're going to get to the hunt.
We'll get to the hunt.
So Quillen is like, "Oh man, this is bad. What do I do?" And before he can figure out what he's going to do, Torin Natch Jr. shows up with a cabal of people in black body gloves wearing black and gold animal masks. And Torin is like, "You're a terrible leader, Dad. You're too, like, soft. Like, we are supposed to run this world. Everyone else is just sheep." And the two sort of factions of this cult have a fight.
This felt a little too
forced.
Little too forced.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like it was just like, really, he's there at just the right time
yeah.
to see this. And there's really a fairly long section in which Torin and Famus are going at it.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, like, where is Drask?
Where's everyone else? Yeah. Apparently the rich people are just like milling about eating their human sandwiches and being like, oh, this is dramatic.
No, I mean, they were like circled around watching it. Like, this is while Drask and Anatoly are trying to escape.
Drask sneaks away and he finds Barnabas's man, Anatoly, in a cage, missing his arm. Because
it's a sampler. Yeah,
it's a sampler arm. So they've cut off his arm and they've been torturing him. And then you get a little bit more of that sort of, this is really traumatic for Drask and Anatoly, right? Yeah. Like, this is a big dude who fights people all the time, and he's been really broken down by being treated like cattle, as you would expect. And they sort of help each other try and figure out a way out of there. And long story short, they do get out of this compound. They get out into the daylight, and the walls around this section of Polaris are getting closed because the hunt is about to start.
The hunt is about to start. Now, this is a thing that we have seen in other hive cities in Necromunda, when there's a plague, when there's riots, when there's just overpopulation and they need to just cull people the old-fashioned way. You can seal off sections of these hive cities and either, inject a chemical or just let it burn itself out over the next few decades.
Yeah.
This, though, is a little bit different because they basically fake a reason to seal off a section.
I think they fake an emergency.
And
they have the sort of local authorities close this section. I think he said at the end, sometimes they fake a malfunction that, like, the gates just closed by accident.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then all of the crazy rich people hunt poor people and then eat them.
Correct.
Yeah.
This is how most of them get their meat. And it seemed to be, as I'm thinking about it, a split between, like, the delicacy meats that Mercutio would bring in that are like very specific, and you'd find people who had these experiences on certain body parts, versus the actual thrill of the hunt to get like just the body, and like you're eating this because you hunted it yourself and that feels good.
Yeah, and so obviously Torin loves this. He loves the hunting part. Famus is out and about trying to catch Drask, right? And they know that he's not going to be able to escape because the walls are closed. But Anatoly has like a cool under the skin implant, like a subdermal implant that lets him send a signal to Barnabas. And also Drask decides that like he is going to face the Natchez. So he sends Anatoly onto the walls and like we don't get to see that, so I'm not sure how it happens, but somehow Anatoly escapes and alerts the authorities. And meanwhile, Quillen confronts first the senior Natch and kills him. Then Torin shows up and he also kills him. But what we didn't cover is that on their way out of this place, Quillen and Anatoly discover what is basically a museum to the first landing. And in that museum...
No, Drask discovers it before
he finds Anatoly. Yeah. In that museum, there's like a roster of the crew from the ship that the Vranks family came from, and the captain of that...
All of the first families came from this ship. Like, that is where all their family names come from.
The captain is Araceli Vranks, or someone who looks a lot like Araceli Vranks. She looks exactly like her. And so he has taken that with him and intends to hold it for later things. But it gets destroyed in his fight with the Natchez. And then he wakes up in a hospital. That we don't really see that end. He kills them, and then he wakes up in the hospital. And things are still bad.
Yeah, it's the thing I wanted to mention before as sort of a comparison to Necromunda is in Necromunda, there is a group known as the Spire Hunters, and that's spelled Spyr, I think.
Spear.
They are young nobles that go down to fight the gangs, mostly for the thrill of it.
For fun.
Some of the noble families are like super military focused and are like, you must show that you can survive combat, and so they do it down as more of like a rite of passage.
Test, yeah.
Others just do it because they're bored, but they go down there in like fully kitted out, custom like mech rigs almost, and there's all sorts of different designs for that. And these suits, like these animal suits that the nobles were described as having reminded me a lot of those spire suits.
Yeah, I do. There's a couple times where Quillen encounters someone wearing a suit, and he's like, it's way better than anything the police have.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he wakes up in the hospital. And surprisingly, I mean, his boss, Constantine, is mad at him. But the RBDs are there. And
yeah, so there's an investigation that gets pulled in, that pulls the RBDs in, which always sounds terrible to me. I will continue to want to call them the Arbites.
Arbites?
Yeah.
I like RBDs.
It just sounds tighter.
Okay.
Anyway, the investigation has started. The Vranks Corporation is opening up all of its books and records to allow them to investigate.
Vranks is being 100% cooperative.
Right, as well as putting her full support behind Drask and saying he was 100% on the right on this.
Yeah.
And don't do anything terrible to him.
Yeah. So he's not getting arrested at the RBD's level. There will be some sort of hearing at his local bastion, but he probably won't get fired because he has the full support of the Vranks Corporation behind him.
So he goes to see Vranks and question her on what exactly she is, given this picture that's thousands of years old. And what she says is sort of a mix of stasis and the occasional juvenance.
Yeah.
Which, okay, that could get you there. It wasn't the answer I was expecting.
I thought she was going to be like a demon. I don't know.
She was never going to be a demon.
I guess.
I don't expect any actual demons of any kind to show up in any Warhammer Crime books ever.
Okay.
It's not those types of stories.
I guess.
And those don't happen as often as you think in the Greater Imperium.
I guess. I wanted something more, but it also felt very much like an open ending for a sequel.
Yeah, so Vranks is now like, I'm gonna be your
benefactor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's like, you mean you own me? And she's like, I wouldn't say it that
little
way.
bit.
Yeah, but that is definitely what she means.
That is how it ends.
Yeah, and he goes home and he wipes his murder board from this murder, and he puts one thing at the top of his murder board, and it's Vranks.
Yeah.
And that's the end.
Of the 3 Warhammer Crime books, I would say this is the one I am most interested in a sequel.
I would agree with that. I want a sequel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, I'll take that back, but I can't tell you why until you read Bloodlines.
Okay. Give it a score.
8 out of 10.
Oh, we're agreed.
Yeah.
I was going to say it's a solid 8 out of 10.
It's a solid 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I thought it was great. I appreciate a film noir. I appreciate a sort of gritty, broken detective. I love a serial killer.
I think the overall crime was very solid. I think the resolution of it was okay. Like the Tauren Famis thing, I wasn't super in love with it. I loved the location of it. That was
great.
very cool.
Yes.
And the introspection I thought was good. I think Drask is unique enough from the other Probator characters.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
8 out of 10.
8 out of 10. Yeah.
Ready for book 2.
We'll see how long that takes.
All right.
All right. Our next book is actually going to be a little bit of an older one.
I don't know what it is.
Because in our rush to get to the Siege of Terra,
Horus versus the Emperor.
we did skip a bunch of the Horus Heresy books. And now that we're waiting on End in the Death Part 2, I thought it best to have Ebony go back and read Ruinstorm, which I think would make for a very interesting contrast in the presentation of Sanguinius as we have seen him in the Siege versus as we see him really at the height of warp involvement for those who know about what Ruinstorm is about.
Okay.
So that'll be one to look forward to.
We'll
be
see
interested
how I
to
feel
hear your
about
thoughts.
Sanguinius, yeah. I used to think he was whiny, and he's warmed on me at the end of where we are in the Siege. I'm like, all right, I can get behind Sanguinius.
We'll see how you feel about this one.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Bye, everyone.